Welcome back to the Fearless Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique Kaufman, and this week I speak with my amazing colleague, Hannah Garces, to discuss Taylor Swift's recent cancellation of her Eras Tour concerts in Vienna, Austria, following a discovered planned terror attack by members who had recently pledged their allegiance to ISIS. The attack got sweeping news coverage. People across the West were outraged for these Swifties, many of whom had flown from across the world to watch Taylor Swift in her world record-breaking Eras Tour. But the Western media quickly moved on. There's a lot to this story. It's emblematic of the cultural moment we're in, this clash of Western values versus the Islamist vision for the West. The planned attack, which included chemical gas and weapons, as well as machetes, was targeting young Western girls going to a concert, with Taylor Swift being the image of Western femininity, of feminism, of what it means to be a strong, powerful, and successful woman, dancing on stage in small sequence costumes, singing about her female liberation and many relationships. This attack was not just strategic. Of course, an attack on a Taylor Swift concert would have garnered headlines from around the world. It was also an attack against everything that Taylor Swift represents. This is the perfect example of how it's first these Saturday people, it's first the Jews on October 7th, for example, at the Nova Music Festival massacre. And then it's the Sunday people, Christians, or those in the Judeo-Christian West. And then it's the rest. And we saw that also this past week with the attack against Hindus in Bangladesh. One of the terrorists, the planned terrorist, was an 18-year-old Iraqi national who had recently pledged his allegiance to ISIS after being radicalized online, particularly through TikTok. This is also an example of the radicalization of the young Gen Z generation in the West through platforms such as TikTok, which peddle revisionist history and propaganda. There's a lot to this conversation. It represents this civilizational clash, and it also speaks to a growing youth who oppose the West, even those who are from and live in the West. Over the last year, we have seen the rise of a postmodern neo-Marxist revolution across college campuses. This young Gen Z generation here in the United States, with 16 million aging into the electorate, have greatly shaped American politics and the discourse surrounding Jews and the war in Israel, and large spread condemnation for Israel's self-defense following an act of war and provocation by Hamas. Many of these young American college students, these Gen Zers who get most of their information from TikTok, believe that an end to this conflict includes Israel relinquishing its land and giving it to Hamas and the Palestinians. We are at a flashpoint in history. This upcoming election is so important. And events such as the Taylor Swift concert speak to and are emblematic of the clash that is currently happening and the clash to come, and the different visions that the neo-Marxist left have for our Western culture, a different vision that the Islamists have for the West and our culture. Both converge at a desire to see the Judeo-Christian West taken down, but their vision for what to do after couldn't be more different. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hannah Garces, welcome to the Fearless Project podcast. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much, Dominique. It's great to be here.
Can you just give our viewers a bit of a background on your time here at Philos and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I help with the advocacy at Philos, which was the Philos Action League, and we're becoming Generation Zion. All of our focus is combating anti-Semitism, combating anti-Zionism, standing with our Jewish friends and neighbors, and really strengthening the bonds between the Christian and Jewish community here in the U.S. for us to, fight the powers that are anti-Israel, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish. They're coming at us from all angles. So I galvanize the people we have around the country. We have people in all 50 states. And whenever an anti-Semitic incident happens or anti-Israel incident happens, we get someone to show up for the Jewish community. I'm really proud of that. And I just need more people to join me because there's so much going on, as you are well aware with the news cycle. So that's what I do at Philos. I've been here for 3 years now, over, I think.
And can you tell people, we could just plug it right now, where to sign up for the White Rose initiative that you were mentioning?
Great. Yeah. So you can go to the Philos Project page and look for the Philos Action League. It's at the bottom. And we also have a new website coming out soon for Gen Zion. So that's going to be gen-zion.org. And you can sign up right there for our newsletter to stay involved. We're moving everything over, rebranding. It's going to be really fun. We'll have some great merch that's going to come out, and all the proceeds go to doing the work that we do.
Yeah, I've seen the merch. The merch is awesome. Like, do I get one just for being a staff member? And I'll wear it on here. And the work that y'all are doing is so important as well, just obviously since October 7th before, but more so like the precedent and the need for that now, since the attacks. And I know that there's probably going to be an uptick in campus riots again with students going back to school. So the work that you guys do is really invaluable. So thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. It's hard work, but someone has to do it.
And you guys do it well, you and Allison. All right. So we're going to talk today about what happened in Vienna with the Taylor Swift Eras Tour concert being canceled. Just a little bit of background for the audience if you hadn't heard the news, if you're not a Swiftie, or maybe if you don't care about Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift's, I believe it was 3 nights, were canceled in Vienna. Her World's Eras Tour, I believe it's the highest grossing tour in history for a female artist. I know that she has set that record. She's wildly, wildly famous and popular. And I'm sure everyone in our audience has at least heard of her. And the concert was targeted by an ISIS attack. It was discovered by the Austrian police or intelligence service, and it was stopped. But as a result of that, the concerts were canceled. And the news did highlight that one of the terrorists was a 19 or an 18-year-old Iraqi national who had been radicalized on TikTok and online and had recently pledged his allegiance to ISIS. So there's a lot here in this story. I think kind of at first glance, it's just a concert that was canceled because of terror, and the news really quickly moved on. But I think there's different kind of news threads we can talk about here. And the first that I really want to touch on is the radicalization of the youth. We see this in Europe. Obviously, this 18-year-old supposed terrorist was an Iraqi national, but we're seeing Western youth also radicalized on TikTok. Lots of propaganda on TikTok. Me and you often talk about or speak out against in activism or education, the revisionist history that's often peddled on Instagram and TikTok for this younger generation. Can you speak to just where our youth is? We can talk specifically here in the West as well, and the role TikTok plays in anti-Semitism.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so much to unpack. First, are you a Swiftie? I mean, I'm not a Swiftie. I liked some of her old stuff. Full disclosure for the audience because it's out there. But regardless if you like her or not, that shouldn't have happened. But I wanted to know before we started.
I was a hardcore Swiftie as a kid. I am actually going to her concert, but I would not call myself a Swiftie as a 26-year-old sitting here today. But I can admire her music, but I also have some of my own like personal issues with some of her like political stances on things, and even just the idea of feminism that she's peddled here in the West. So from a personally, I've kind of drifted away, but I wouldn't call myself a hardcore Swiftie. So you can't offend me. Essentially, you cannot offend me.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So TikTok is wildly popular, we know. And this radicalization that is being highlighted by this 18-year-old who decided he wanted to potentially take out as many people as possible in horrific ways. In the reports I was reading, like the detail that went into the planning of this was, if it happened, it would have been a bloodbath.
I believe it was chemical weapons as well. Is that correct?
Chemical weapons, and then whoever didn't get hit with that, it was going to be a machete, and just as many people. So it is insane to think about an 18-year-old getting radicalized this way. But when we look at the culture and we look at the trends and how influential social media is, it makes sense. And something that we've been seeing, I've been working in the pro-Israel advocacy and education space for over 10 years, and we have been raising the alarm about this radicalization prior to the introduction and the explosion of social media, especially TikTok. So on campuses, we have been calling this out for well over 10 years. Even when I was on campus, we had people calling out this radicalization because it was coming from the professors. It was coming from these student groups on the ground. And, college is a time to explore and to, challenge your worldview and, gain knowledge and critical thinking skills. At least that's what it used to be for. And now it's just become a ground for building advocates, activists, even for causes. And a lot of people want to get involved and a lot of people want to do something good in this world. And so we have these people jumping on the bandwagon. And this is just tenfold because of TikTok, because you have citizen journalism or just people who are exposing you to opinions that might not even be fact. And the algorithm doesn't do us any favors. So once you hear one point of view and you like it, you're just going to keep getting that. And then you're going to be in that echo chamber. So you're not hearing both sides of the story. You're not hearing, criticism to these points of view or information. And so you're taking it as news or you're taking it as truth without really evaluating it. So this radicalization is so easily done. It's just going down the rabbit hole, I would say. And the stat that I read that 91% of Gen Z gets their news from TikTok blows my mind, because TikTok is not a news source. Yes, there are news platforms that use TikTok, but it was meant to be, a social media app for whatever. And we know that China is behind TikTok, and the algorithm that gets here in the West is not the same that the Chinese counterparts are seeing. Like, TikTok there is educational. They're actually learning skills. TikTok here is learning dances and stupid videos and then propaganda. So it's so crazy that 91% of people are only looking at TikTok or social media for their news, which means we need to do better to make sure real information, truthful, factual information is getting out there. And it just proves that the radicalization doesn't even take a lot. If this person was looking to be part of something and was having a hard time in their personal life or whatnot, and not liking the culture they saw when they looked around outside where they were living and found a counter approach, and it happened to be some ISIS affiliate talking to this person or sending them information, and they just ate it up and then took that information and brought it to action. So it is a situation we have to be very aware of. It has been happening. So it happened before in a different way on campus. It's still happening on campus. So you have the campus radicalization with professors and student groups combined with social media. And then you see what happens after October 7th on college campuses, where all these people who had no idea about Israel or even that region of the world decided to show up and scream for ceasefire or scream to, globalize the intifada, words that they don't know what they're talking about, but they saw their friends doing it. They saw it was cool, and then they jumped on. So this radicalization, it's really concerning, and it is important that the right sources of information get out to people as well. And it's the first thing they hear, the touch point, versus the other side, because that's the problem.
Mm-hmm. I want to add to your stat for TikTok, ages or from the birth year 1997 to 2012, there's 37 million users here in the United States. And if 91% of them are getting their news from TikTok, that's almost an entire generation that is getting false news, revisionist history, propaganda. You mentioned the algorithm too. It's a echo chamber that's consistently, self-reinforcing these views, so you never get challenged on what you actually think. And then also, we do this all the time with your advocacy work. I mean, with education, the algorithms will oftentimes suppress stuff that we put out that is factual or historic or speaking out against anti-Semitism. It's actually discouraged on many of these platforms, and it's really hard to grow a platform that might counter the mainstream narrative. So I think it goes to an even deeper, perhaps more sinister, not to sound conspiratorial, but there's definitely an agenda that's being pushed and used through these platforms. I want to also mention, you mentioned socialization and radicalization through TikTok, we have a youth, specifically Gen Z, that's extremely disenfranchised post pandemic. The pandemic happened at a critical point in their development. Obviously, social media, they've only grown up at a time knowing social media. And when you have these radical ideas that offer socialization, right? Social justice as a movement is essentially a club in which if you buy in, you're socialized, and it's really easy to become radicalized from there. That's the same way youth is radicalized in terror organizations in the Middle East. If they have grievances and a terror organization offers socialization, it becomes attractive to a disenfranchised generation. And the other thing you mentioned was professors and education. Critical theory has been peddled in academia for multiple generations and decades at this point. But I actually pinpoint 2020 and the rise of BLM and the riots that came after that as a point in an inflection where critical theory and neo-Marxism was no longer in the fringes of academia, but it became platformed on social media. That's when we started seeing infographics become popular, and critical theory language that was reserved for academia and peer-reviewed articles is now being used in the mainstream. So I think it's interesting that we're at this shift where academia is now popular.
Yeah. No, everything you said is what we're seeing all the time. And you're right. Like, we're fighting an uphill battle because the social media, whoever the powers that be behind the scenes, again, no conspiracy theory here, but the people who run these companies, it's for profit and hopefully nothing more sinister, as you insinuated, but they profit off clicks and the longer you're on. And I even saw a documentary about, social media and the kind of evils or the problems with it. And these are free platforms and you're the product. So they want you on as long as possible, just taking in whatever. So if you log off of the platform, they're not benefiting from that. They want to keep you on. So these rabbit holes people get down, or like you said, you want to be part of a club. Oh, you found it online, even though it's not really social because you're sitting maybe in your room on a phone, but you're part of the movement or part of whatever is trending at the time. So you feel included, even though it's actually very isolating and causing even more issues with, depression and feeling alone in the world, social media. So there's a million, places we could go with this, but the radicalization and again, like you said, bringing this like academic into the mainstream is very interesting. But yeah, all of the organizations that we work with now have taken that model and tried to use it to disseminate accurate information.
Mm-hmm. I also think, because we could go so many places with this and have so many more conversations, but I think just to touch on it as well, we live in a postmodern, really secular society that's rejecting Judeo-Christian values, which is, I think, at the core of the critical theory neo-Marxist left. And then Islamism, their shared ideological, I guess, compatibility would be in wishing to see that divested or dismantled here in the United States. That's what's being advocated for across college campuses with these sit-ins or these protests and encampments. But we live in a postmodern secular society, and I've had Hussein Mansour on to talk about this, but the Palestinian issue in the social justice kind of circles and movement has become this moral symbol. And so I think we have a disenfranchised youth that is not particularly religious. And so for them, social justice advocacy becomes this moral compass in their lives to orient and socialize themselves around, which is really interesting. I think that's why we're seeing it become so popular across the young generations. We are obviously coming up on an election year, so not making this like crazy political, but we have a block of voters who have greatly shaped even the talking points of this upcoming election. I know Vice President Harris passed on Shapiro for her VP pick. He's Jewish, and he had a pro-Israel, you might be more informed on this, but a pro-Israel article from, I believe, decades ago. And the fact that the campaign passed up on him as a candidate because of his Jewishness, I think speaks to where their voter base is on the issue. So how do you think this young demographic of voters here in the US, this Gen Z, who are not just, pro-Palestinian, but staunch supporters of Hamas. They believe the October 7th massacres were justified. How are they shaping even just the dialogue and conversation in this upcoming election?
Yeah. I mean, I think it just goes to show that that voter block we talked about, these young voters, Gen Z, which is the generation right behind me, because I'm a millennial, proud of it. But um, it caused a greater divide on both sides of the aisle. Actually, we're seeing that this issue that came after October 7th and really the unmasking of anti-Zionism, because a lot of people beforehand were saying, anti-Zionism is different than anti-Semitism. It's okay to criticize Israel. So they use the anti-Zionism as an excuse. We're not being anti-Semitic. But then after October 7th, the mask came off. And, when the Jewish community here in the US and in the diaspora around the world are getting attacked for merely being Jewish because of a conflict happening thousands of miles away from them, just because it's Israel and it's the Jewish state, you can no longer say that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. It 100% is. So this has leaked into the political discord and caused this, I would say, divide on both sides of the aisle. So we see a contingent in the Democratic Party, like you mentioned, who didn't want Shapiro because of, again, they're saying his support for Israel, but we know the more sinister undercurrent is anti-Semitism. There is anti-Semitism on that side of the aisle, and it's becoming more mainstream because of the squad and progressives and this huge block of people who don't want anything to do with our strongest ally in the region, like, first of all. So that's something we're seeing for sure. And it's affecting, like you said, talking points, but also even picks for different positions, policy, which is more concerning than even these personalities. Like, let's not get caught up in the personality, but the policy, the fact that someone who could be elected to the highest office in the land would even flirt with the idea of an arms embargo against Israel is mind blowing. And if you talk to someone 10 years ago, that would never have even been part of the conversation. So the fact that those words are being thrown around, that's pretty drastic and concerning, and should concern not just the Jewish community, but the American community, because Israel is our last defense in that region against the Islamism terrorist threat that is coming from both the likes of Iran, but also ISIS. It's real. And honestly, they're probably already here. But again, not to get too political, but they're probably already here. There are cells here. It's a matter of time, unfortunately, before something happens. And so the fact that we would alienate our strongest defense against that threat is mind blowing to me. And then on the right, we're seeing, like, on the Republican side, the swing with the young voters in this, again, radicalized environment. We see those who want so much to be isolated from everything happening in the world because they see the Israel Hamas war as just another war to add to the list of things we shouldn't be involved in. However, you and I feel like we should be helping our ally again, but there are those on the Republican side who don't want to give money to anybody. We need to take care of our domestic policies first. I mean, yes, and that is affecting our domestic policy. But there's a real call on that side of the aisle to isolate and not help for another reason. So it's crazy to see this divide on both sides. They're different, but they affect the Israel issue in the same way, which is very wild. But yeah, the election is definitely going to be crucial to what happens next. And Gen Z, or those who are against, Israel and that support, they're a huge block, and it's going to show on the ballots, because they're not happy right now with both of the mainstream candidates and their stance on Israel.
And I think even past this election, as this young generation steps into roles of authority as well, we're going to see a huge shift in policy downstream 10 years when it comes to Israel. And as you mentioned, the US Israel alliance has been a bipartisan status quo for decades. It has just recently become politicized. And I want to read just some stats when it comes to Gen Z kind of shaping a lot of the discourse, at least on the left. And you mentioned accurately that this is happening on both sides. And I think the isolationist radical right, which is deeply anti-Semitic, I think religiously and culturally as well, but it's taking on different forms, is a reaction to the radicalism and the neo-Marxist left of the same age group. So in December of 2023, a Harvard poll found 51% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 24, so a smaller demographic within the Gen Z generation, said that they believe the long-term answer to the Israel-Palestinian conflict was for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and the Palestinians, which is very radical. In this upcoming election, estimated 41% of Gen Z voters will be able to vote. And since the last presidential election, 16 young Americans will age into the electorate and be able to vote. So we're seeing, I think, the left in particular kind of cater to this demographic. But we're also seeing on the right, even though it's not as mainstream yet, there has emerged a neo-isolationist group of people like Candace Owens, who we've talked about here on the podcast, or Tucker Carlson, who are deeply, at least I can speak for Candace Owens because she's very overt about it, anti-Semitic, and the policy that they propose or put forth undermines U.S. interest and security in the exact same way that the neo-Marxist left does. It's kind of the horseshoe theory where they meet and converge at the bottom, and we end up with the same result, which is not having a strong alliance with Israel, not having them as our first defense in the Middle East. And ultimately, it undermines and just tears down the Judeo-Christian values here in the West, which have been under attack for years and years now. So we're kind of talking about that younger demographic of voters. From an advocacy perspective, where do you think these riots or these sit-ins or these protests on college campuses are going to go as the new school year starts? Are you guys predicting there's going to be more? Do you think it'll be more organized than it was even in the spring? And again, with the election looming, like how is this going to influence even education on the election on college campuses?
Yes, we are anticipating that it's going to be ramped up for sure, again, because it's an election year. And we're also coming up on the anniversary of October 7th. And so we're already kind of hearing reports about the pro-Palestinian, unfortunately, mostly pro-Hamas side, trying to reserve spaces on campus for October 7th, when it's going to be a day they know that Jewish students or students that are supportive of Israel are trying to have vigils or things to honor the anniversary of the massacre. So our counterparts are doing the same. Obviously, it's going to be about calling, saying that Israel is still committing genocide. Like, we have to end this, ceasefire now, all of that. So we fully anticipate that this next semester is going to be just as full of turmoil as the last, because again, November, the election, it really is going to affect so much. So we're working with our, partners in the space to just get as prepared as possible, because there are going to be things. And yeah, it's going to affect education. We've already seen it, and it's just going to further isolate and alienate those who value the Judeo-Christian morals that this country was founded on. I think that the Jewish community and students and their friends, like allies, like such as ourselves in the Christian community, have seen, the mask slip even further off on college campuses, where, again, you're harassing Jewish students, you're harassing, the Hillel or the Chabad. These are not political establishments. These are Jewish communal centers for students to practice their faith and their culture, and they're getting attacked because, again, of a conflict happening thousands of miles away. So the correlation, again, the anti-Semitism is off the charts on campus, off the charts in society. This is the oldest hatred in the world. It has been around for so long, and it comes in waves, and the foundation was already set, and all of the things that happened after, and again, with social media and you only seeing, the small clickbait of a picture of, rubble and a child in Gaza, and it's easy to be radicalized and be like, that they're the problem. And so they're looking at the news, easily turn someone into going down the anti-Semitic rabbit hole. and all of the conspiracies that go along with it. So it's a problem. It has been around for so long and it continues to. I just think for our generation, it's interesting to see the way it is manifesting. And, I believe it's a canary in the coal mine for a society. So if you see a society that is being radicalized with this anti Semitic rhetoric and targeting and othering the Jewish community, you know that things are going to get worse before they get better, unfortunately. Just look at history and all the times this has happened. And look, it's not going to end with the Jewish community. And that's what I think our network needs to be fully aware of as Christians, as people of faith. We share the same roots. We both uniquely share the Hebrew Bible, what they call the Tanakh, which is the Old Testament. We both read those books. And it's going to affect us. And in the latest, variation with the Islamists, they're going to go for the Saturday people first, what they call like the Jewish people, because their holy day, Shabbat, is Saturday, and then the Sunday people. That's the Christians. We go to church on Sunday. So if you are standing on the sidelines and thinking, this is not affecting me, it's only affecting the Jewish community, you are wildly wrong. You need to get involved in the fight. It's a fight against Bible believing people. And I say Bible because of the Hebrew Bible. We both share that. We do have our differences. We have the New Testament and the Jewish community does not. And that's important on a theological level, but that's not the issue I think we need to worry about today. The issue we need to worry about today is that they're coming after people of faith who believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that includes you and me. So it starts on the campuses, and we've seen this with revolutions throughout history with like the Marxist movement. It starts with the students and then it leaks out. And we also know that like what happens on campus is upstream of culture, of downstream of culture. So it's going to happen. It's going to leak into every aspect of society. And we're seeing that, and it's crazy as a student of history myself to see this in real life. I'm like, wow, I thought this was just stuff we read about in our history books. So if we don't learn from the past and figure out ways for the Christian community to be open and like loud and advocate and push back, it's just going to keep ramping up. And the sit-ins on college campuses are going to be like the least of our concerns. So it's a war of for the hearts and minds of this young generation. And it's easy for them to throw a watermelon in their bio on Instagram and, be like, yeah, cool, I'm joining this. But at the end of the day, this ideology, it wants to destroy them as well because they're just a tool to getting the end result and they have no idea. And it's very sad. So I think we just, in general, in the education space and advocacy space, need to do better and really call out anti-Semitism whenever and wherever we see it.
Yeah, that was great, Hannah. I think you very beautifully illustrated how it's first the Saturday people, as you mentioned, the Jews, then it's the Sunday people, and then it's the infidels, then it's everybody else. We even saw the attack in Bangladesh against a Hindu temple. The Islamist vision and agenda for the world starts with the Bible believing people of the book, as we're classified, but is coming for the neo-Marxist social justice movement as well. And so we're seeing the attack here in the West on our Judeo-Christian values, which again, I think a lot of Christians might not be anti-Semitic, but they're extremely apathetic. I think you can speak to apathy being a huge issue that we run up against in trying to advocate or educate against anti-Semitism, or more warn what's to come in the future if we don't look to the past and history to kind of correct where we're at now. And I think that apathy is there until it comes for us. And that Taylor Swift concert, obviously Taylor Swift is not a beacon of a Christian woman, but she is a symbol of Western femininity and feminism. And I think the planned attack is a perfect example of how this Islamist vision is expanding westward, and it will affect us. So that's kind of, I think, also just to tie it back to the initial news article. But as you mentioned here, the Judeo-Christian values we hold dear are being attacked on one side by the postmodern neo-Marxist social justice movement, and then on the other side, the Islamists. And at the moment, there seems to be unity between those two kind of pressures. But as you mentioned, at the end of the day, the Islamists have a very different vision for the West than the neo-Marxist social justice movement has. And at the moment, they are mutually beneficial to each other in tearing down the Judeo-Christian values. But what they envision our society looking like are vastly different. And I think at the end of the day, it'll kind of be a monster or serpent that's like eating its own tail because they are so ideologically incompatible. Um, with that, I would love to kind of get your thoughts on why Taylor Swift represents for the West. Like, what does she as a feminist represent that Islamic fundamentalism or Islamism ideologically just rejects? And how can we look at this as kind of a warning for what could be to come in the West?
So I would say Taylor Swift is a perfect icon for everything that's like opposite of what Islamism is, because she is a strong, independent woman who believes in Western like feminism, which is not compatible. Like let's look at her dress code. There's no modesty there. She is fully okay with showing her body, and in the West, that's your prerogative. She's allowed to do that. That is not something that is okay in the Islamism world. Um, like just take a look at the nations that are under that kind of rule. Like for Iran, for example, follows this idea, not the people, but the government of Iran. And women go to jail and are killed if their hair is showing improperly under hijab. Taylor Swift is showing her legs and wearing like a tank top and her hair's out. So just put them side by side, not compatible. She talks about, her relationships and sexuality. Like, I don't even have to go into that, but yeah, not compatible. That's not something that is valued in that culture at all. She, has a lot of money and a lot of power and influence. And again, as a woman, that's not the role women have in that worldview as well. Men are the dominant figures. Women might have some responsibilities and certain places, certain positions, but they are not elevated in the same way as in the West, where women are, empowered and, cheerleaded on to high positions of authority over others. That's not. So, um, yeah, everything about Taylor Swift. And I mean, she just represents and encapsulate the West and Western ideas that are not compatible under, Islamic law. So that was a very targeted attack for a reason. Like they wanted to make a statement, and it wasn't her. It was everything she stands for and represents that they were going after. And yeah, it should be a wake up call because, again, people who have been paying attention have been sounding this alarm for years that this idea is not compatible in a Western, free and open democratic society, because that is not what they want. They want the whole world under Sharia law. So it just blows my mind that someone who believes that can stand next to someone who is chanting for, like feminists for Gaza or something, because it's such strange bedfellows, because you're right, they do not match on any like points that matter to either of them, except the dismantling of the, evil imperialist Western infrastructure, which happens to be the United States and Israel, right? A proxy of the United States, as they say. So I think that we all need to like take a step back and look at the undercurrent of why that was significant, not just, okay, it was Taylor Swift, but really say, okay, hey, Western world, and that includes Europe, and Europe has been getting more affected than we even have, because they have in different countries, like no-go zones already where Sharia law is, and that's crazy to me that a Western nation was like, yeah, it's okay, you can live here, but have your own like legal system in a certain part that we can't touch. It's yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, but Europe is getting the brunt of it. And we know, like, okay, what happens in Europe, it's maybe 10 years ahead of what's going to come over and happen here. So if we don't wake up and get it together, then things are going to get really, really rocky. And again, it's the war against, like you said, the people of the book, but everyone. Like the situation that's happening in Bangladesh is very scary reminiscent of things that happened in Israel on October 7th. And so the Jewish community has been speaking out so loudly about what's going on because they're looking and I'm like their playbooks were the same. It's go in, kill the men, rape the women, burn the houses, like horrible atrocities to the Jewish community in southern Israel. And then now happening in Bangladesh to the Hindu minority, all because they are not Muslim. They're not adhering to this so-called, world that these Islamists want to see. So I think Taylor Swift's concert is like a poignant moment. And if we collectively, as people of the West, don't, course correct where we're at, we're going to see bumpier days ahead. And, we do believe, in God and we're Christians. So we always have our faith and know that He is in control no matter what. But while we're here, we're supposed to take care of the well-being of the places we live. We're supposed to be the salt and light. So if we're not bringing like His kingdom here and just letting these other kingdoms come and take over, I mean, it's going to affect us and affect the way we practice our faith and worship. And so we weren't ever meant to idly stand by. You said apathy before. It's really great to have a prayer meeting at church, but you got to get out of the church and like put your feet to your faith and do something about it.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of really great stuff there. I think when we look at the incompatibilities between the West and what Samuel P. Huntington would say, the Islamic civilization or that block, Douglas Murray has been talking a lot about the fight to come between the West and Islamism, or even Islam, not demonizing Christianity and Islam and pitting them against each other. We do believe in pluralism, but there has to be tolerance between those two. And as you mentioned, when we saw the migration of many Syrians into Europe, a lot of refugees were taken in. These Muslim communities failed to assimilate, refused to assimilate. And now, as you mentioned, even in London, there are parts of London that are ruled by Sharia. And so there is this kind of looming fight of civilizational identities coming because of that lack of assimilation. And of course, assimilation doesn't mean abandoning their Muslim beliefs, but that does mean you cannot expect Sharia law to then be enforced or become the new way of law for the Western civilization that you are coming to. And I think that's where we're seeing some of that tension in Europe, which, as I said, Huntington, Douglas Murray, they've all talked about this and kind of projected this coming. And the 10/7 massacre was this inflection point, I think, in that. And kind of going back to the apathy, I think people are apathetic until it affects them. And as you mentioned, the Taylor Swift concert is just a peek and a glimpse into what is to come if we don't course correct. And it's a cautionary tale, I think, for the moment that we're in. And I think if people choose to turn a blind eye and just see this as, oh, it was a terror attack, moving on, I think it's just negligent and it undermines your own security and self-interest. And also just to think this was going to be a concert of mostly young girls. So it's not just that Taylor Swift represents feminism and Western ideas of what it is to be a woman, but everyone in her audience does as well. So these are young girls, people your age, my age, who just wanted to go to a concert dressed really girly, probably dressed similarly, as you mentioned, like the legs shown out. Is a attack against a value system, not just a terror attack. And I think can't drive that point home enough.
Yeah, can I add to that? Yeah. So, maybe they're wearing the friendship bracelet thing at the concert, right? But let's talk about the concert for a second. So this Taylor Swift thing got so much media coverage, like everywhere, because again, the Swiftie army, whatever, she's a huge icon. But then again, 10 months now. Wait, I think we're at 11 actually. 11 months before, there was a concert happening in the south of Israel, the Nova Festival. Okay, a concert with people, not just women, but young men, young adults, even older folks who just wanted to go have a concert in the desert. It was a rave, I think. And the media has been so silent about it. And it's crazy the stark contrast between the Taylor Swift concert coverage that nothing happened, it was thwarted, the attack was thwarted, and a concert where terrorists literally took their phones out and recorded them massacring people. So this bias in is so starkly seen in this moment, because how do you not conflate those two things? Because the same enemy was going after both. And that shows this anti Semitic bias in the media. I don't know what it is. I don't know if they're just don't want to offend the Muslim community, which I think is part of it. But you have to cover news accurately if you're a media outlet. And by that happening and no one talking about it, where 12,000 people that like were killed on October 7th, and a huge chunk of that number came from one event, and it was a concert. So it blows my mind that we're, seeing like, yes, they already did this. They attacked a theology and a way of life at a music festival in the desert in the south of Israel, and it was crickets. But Taylor Swift, her concert got canceled, and the whole world is like causing a scene. I just had to bring that up because it's, again, the unmasking of the anti-Semitic bias that we see in our world. And again, the Christian community needs to push back. Anybody who like loves the West needs to push back. If you care about your way of life, like, you should be causing a scene and saying, why didn't we talk about this? Why does only Taylor Swift get the attention?
Yeah, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned how a morning show added her concert to a list of concerts targeted for a terror attack, and they failed to mention the Nova Music Festival, which, as you pointed out, highlights this just anti-Semitic bias in the media. And just a slight jab, because I've been talking about Candace Owens a lot on this podcast. She's proposed that there's like this Jewish like secret society that is running, like the classic Jewish conspiracy that's running our government, which I just think is so ironic, because if there's a secret Jewish cabal that's running like Hollywood and DC and the media, they do a really bad job at highlighting their own people and massacres committed against their own people. But that's just another note, because that argument is just so startling to me. It also should not be lost on us that Taylor Swift herself did not speak out against what happened at the Nova Music Festival, and neither did any, really, or most prominent Hollywood figures, especially in the music industry, which would have been the perfect moment for Taylor Swift and others to speak out, because it was targeting a group of people in the same industry and space that they occupy. And so, her silence was very loud. I know that her and a lot of other Hollywood icons were seen around the same time leaving a Gaza fundraiser. And we also see the ideological end of Taylor Swift's own political position on these issues, which I find ironic. And that really hasn't been a topic in any of the analysis that I've seen kind of covering her concerts being canceled. What do you think it says about us here in the West that the cancellation of her concert made news in ways that the Nova Music Massacre didn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a society, we're so, we haven't experienced, at least here in the West, the majority of us who grew up here, like really hardship and like difficult things. And so we're distracted by the fluff and the pop culture, and we really like to be in the know about what these celebrities are doing, because we don't have a monarch in our society. So but we have celebrities, and so we want to follow and hear what they're doing and like what's cool and trending, and we want to follow the latest TikTok influencer and all of that. And so that is more important to us than a real heart-wrenching situation happening far away. I think because of online and we're just always inundated with a fire hose of information and things, I think we were, as people, weren't meant to see all the horrible things that happen around the world all at the same time. And so our level to care as a people is like so tapped out. So we saw, like, people saw it and it was so horrific and so malicious and so just, there are not, like, not even words, like demonic, like like my stomach still hurts when I think about it or see any of the footage. And it's so much so that way. I think that people shut off because it's so hard to fathom that people would do this to one another, because we don't experience that here or never really have, um, as like a majority of people. Obviously, we have people living in the U.S. who are refugees from horrific situations, so they probably understand or can relate more. But we're so distracted by, bread and circuses, right? Like the easy stuff, like what we're doing this weekend. And, I'm not saying don't go live your life and enjoy the small things. I'm so about that. That's a way to like fight back against these things, is like look at the beautiful, the lovely, the pure. And at the same time, it's important to look at the hard and the like uncomfortable, because you're part of this world, and those things, though they seem far away, could, in some quick switch of realities, be something so close to home that you have to worry about. And wouldn't you want someone somewhere like raising their voice and raising alarm for you if you couldn't? So I think that, again, the Taylor Swift thing just shows like this is what they want us to like pay attention to, and they don't want us to look at the hard things, because it's easier, to, use propaganda, shove things down people's throats if you're distracted by fluff and you're not really thinking critically or like paying attention to what's going on. So again, I mean, I would just say look for alternate news sources. Always look at both sides of the conversation before you make your judgment. I also just believe like there is a line between good and evil in this world, and in the West, we've made gray such a good, like a place that everyone wants to be in. And so I think that's also the media, like, okay, we'll talk about this because it didn't happen, so it's gray. We can just talk about Taylor Swift and how it affected the Swifties and whatnot, without getting to like the real root of the issue, because that's too black and white to touch. So I think that we just need to pay attention. And as I mentioned earlier, anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine. It has been happening in Europe, 10 years ago, where it got really bad, and things have escalated. And now we're seeing it get really bad here, and things will escalate. And so we need to be prepared to rise to the occasion when things escalate, before they escalate. Like, get involved, get off the bench. Don't just listen to the news about Taylor Swift and like, where she got her coffee this morning or something, because she didn't have a bomb go off at her concert. There are people who are like battling for their life every day. And, you know, Taylor Swift is one of those people.
There's still hostages from the Nova Music Festival who are not home yet. And I think too, yeah, like right after the concert, everyone was obsessed with, well, how did Taylor react? Like, is Taylor okay? And it's like, okay, well, let's zoom out a little bit and let's think of some parallel examples, and let's advocate for those who unfortunately aren't okay, or who are still held in Gaza. And let's talk about what some of these fundamental ideas are. And I really just want to like hone in and drive this point home. Um, the prophecies of Huntington and of Douglas Murray, that there's this clash between the West and the Islamic civilization. I think saying that can be unpopular sometimes, or that's Islamophobic. It's not wrong to point out that there are fundamental incompatibilities between a Judeo-Christian way of life and civilization, and that's observed in the Muslim world. Where issues arise is when Islamic fundamentalism that we're seeing, take over parts of the West or radicalize the West, try and enforce that way of life in the West and on Western society. And I think we're seeing the West capitulate to that. Even, not covering the Nova Music Festival here in the United States, the media not wanting to offend, Muslim Americans, there should be a clear distinction here in the West between a Muslim and an Islamist or, a terror attack. And I actually think that the media is the one that conflates those two and leads to this narrative that if you speak out even against Islamism, then you're Islamophobic, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And I think it is in capitulating to those fears or to the crowd that wants that we're actually undermining our own security here in the West and our own way of life. And as I mentioned before, Philos does take a stance on pluralism, but pluralism requires mutual respect for both parties. And when we look at Islamism, we see the fundamental rejection of Western values. And we can't coexist in a society where there is a threat that doesn't see a future where Judeo-Christian values can then coexist with an Islamist vision for the Middle East, for the West, or for the world at large. So I just really want to say, because I've gotten to a point where I just won't apologize for being proud of my Judeo-Christian values. We live in a society and culture, especially kind of going back to the rise of critical theory and neo-Marxism, which also wants to tear down the Judeo-Christian roots of our culture and society. Where kind of being proud to be a traditional Christian is a taboo. And I just refuse to give into that. I'm very proud to be a Christian living in the United States. And part of my beliefs, I know your beliefs, is a vision of pluralism and of coexistence. But we're living in a time where maybe your social or cultural adversaries don't want to coexist alongside those wishing to live by Judeo-Christian values. We see that here. I mentioned to you before we even started recording. In the West, the ballerina farms story kind of came up around the same time as the Taylor Swift concert being canceled. And I actually think we could use ballerina farms and Taylor Swift as kind of two examples of feminism here in the United States and the West. And essentially, ballerina farms has like almost 10 million followers on Instagram. She's a Mormon, but representing, Judeo-Christian values. She has a large family. She lives on a farm, and a journalist essentially did a hit piece on her that, she's in an oppressive marriage because her husband is the traditional head of the household. And it led to this whole thing. But we see an intolerance for a traditional Judeo-Christian family here in the West. And I just think it's dangerous because we have kind of pressures coming from both sides, internally with this neo-Marxist movement and then externally with Islamism. And as you said, this concert is just an example of what's to come if we don't correct course, or at least educate ourselves on how our way of life is not just, I guess, demonized. It is demonized. It's demonized by both sides, and there's a lack of tolerance there. So
We could talk all day about a lot of those things. But I will say, I'm married. I'm in a traditional Christian marriage. I have a daughter. And I think that us fighting for the Judeo-Christian values that our country is founded on, that the shared roots of our faith that we have with the Jewish people and coming alongside them as friends and supporting Israel are all things that will benefit my daughter in the future. Like, it's not even about me anymore. It's about the next generation. And we've lost that because we're so narcissistic as a society as well. And what is like, it's again, that's countercultural to what the Judeo-Christian worldview is. It's about dying to self and like living for something that's bigger than yours. But in the West, in this neo-Marxist liberal, like, no, it's about self all the time. So I think that, like you mentioned, like the view of like Hannah, her name ironically is Hannah, on Ballerina Farm, this demonization of a mother who enjoys those traditional roles. Look, she's also a businesswoman and did a lot of other things that they, failed to mention.
Juilliard ballerina.
Exactly. You can like prescribe to a traditional lifestyle and like the confines of the way marriage was meant to be, founded from the Bible, and still do things and like have passions, and it doesn't mean that you like negate those. You just think about other people before yourself. And I mean, I live that out every day because I do this work, but I'm a mom and I'm a wife also. And I mean, those are crucial to who I am and to the fight, because this fight again isn't about me anymore. It's about those coming after me, and my daughter is one of them. What world do I want her walking in? I don't want her walking into a world where she's going to be demonized if she wants to be a stay-at-home mom. And I don't want her walking in a world where she can't openly pray or talk about her faith, where she can't, support Israel as a Bible believing Christian, or, worse, have to worry about walking outside as a woman altogether. No. So I think that there is like a superpower in being, a woman who is proud of her role at home, but also her role outside the home. And again, the Judeo-Christian values honors that. You can see throughout the Bible incredible women who did things that shaped the world, but they honored their, roles in society and their role as a mother and a wife. So you can do both. It's really hard, but you can do both. And I agree with you, like proud to be able to live in this country where we can still freely practice our beliefs. We can say we're Christian, even if our, neighbors might look at us sideways. But I don't want that world to continue here for my daughter. I want us to be able to once again return to, okay, you have a different belief than me and live next door to me, and we can live next to each other and agree on things happening in our local community. That's how it should be. And so we need to fight for that, and we need to continue to, get out of the church, like be the church in the world, and also show our Jewish friends and show Israel that they're not alone in this fight. Because again, it's first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. So if we don't get it together, the Sunday people, like, I don't even know. But on my watch, at least in my household, and I know with Philos and with Gen Zion, like we're going to get it together. And if you want to join us, everybody is welcome. So come and join us to stand up and not be apathetic and get out of the church building and go shape the world and the West for the better.
Well, on that powerful note, thank you so much, Hannah. I hope to have you back on soon.
Would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Philos Project podcast. If you would like to learn more about the shared Judeo-Christian values that we have with our Jewish brothers and sisters, I encourage you to check out our Pathfinder course catalog. Dr. Gerard McDermott teaches an incredible course on Jews, Christians, and the Bible from a theological and historic perspective, and how that relationship is important moving forward. If you would like to learn more about Islam, we have an Intro to Islam course on our Pathfinder course catalog as well. It's important to understand the teachings of Islam, as well as the differences between Islam and Islamism, and just the differences between Christianity and Islam, as we talk about the different civilizational identities and the flashpoints between those two as well. The Philos Project is a nonprofit. If you feel so led to give to educational offerings such as this podcast, I will leave a link in the description below. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week.